welcome back, everyone. So right now in South Carolina, one of these local representatives, a Democrat, has been secretly recorded. It's been leaked by Project Veritas, calling for secret sleepers, sleeper cells, to run as Republicans while secretly working as Democrats. I'm going to play you the audio in just a bit and kind of go over the significance of what this means. We're also going to have some special guests on today. It's the authors of Tearing Us Apart, How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing. And we're going to be talking about the cultural impact of abortion, what it has meant for the United States, possibly where it's going. It'll be an interesting discussion, so stick around for that. Also, Russia, I wanted to do an update on Russia. Russia is talking about, well, they say they're going to arm Belarus with nuclear weapons, and Belarus may soon join the war, which means this is expanding. I'm going to be giving my analysis on what this means in terms of the U.S. or possibly some other European countries joining the war, and where this could be heading. Personal analysis on this. I don't think Europe or the United States has it in their interest to turn this into like World War III, especially because Russia controls so much in terms of food that they can really start immigration crisis into both Europe and the United States. But this is becoming a much larger proxy war, and if Russia pushes things hard enough, puts enough pressure on, for example, Germany with energy markets, it could turn into a much bigger war. I don't know if we call it Third World War, but definitely a much bigger war. We'll be talking about that, folks. A lot to go into. That said, let's jump into the first stories briefly as well. Those of you on YouTube or Rumble or elsewhere, we are giving you a free 14-day trial to Epic TV. So if you don't have that, go into the description beneath this video, grab that. After about the 20-minute mark, we will be going exclusively to Epic TV. There's a lot we can't see on YouTube. And for they deleted our sudden adult death syndrome video just recently and gave us a strike for it. So I'm not censoring myself anymore. If they want to delete our videos, so be it. But come join us on Epic TV, where you have the full discussion, and even if they delete it, it's still there. So great crowd there. So that said, folks, let's jump into the first story. I want to talk first of all about this Democrat representative calling for the creation of these sleeper cells. Now, this YouTube page, this is Project Veritas. Many of you may know it. Let me play you this audio. This is the South Carolina Democrat Senate candidate Krystle Matthews. She's also a state representative currently as well. Now, let me play this. You can get an idea of what she's talking about. She's talked with a guy in prison, and this is the leaked audio from that.
Like, we literally, like, this is the only way you're going to change the dynamics in South Carolina. You got to find some folks that are a little bit polished, maybe are not, nobody really knows them that well. Maybe they haven't really been politically active. But we need some secret sleepers. Like, we need them to run as the other side, even though they for our side. And we need them to win.
Right.
Because that's how, we can battle them in public all day. As long as we know we're working for the same goal. I tell my colleagues up here all the time, I'm going to be that bitch every day of the week. Got too many people that ain't out for us and look like us. But honestly, these ain't the same type of black people that I grew up around. I don't recognize these black people. So I don't black because I don't understand the type of black that they are. Now, can I talk intelligently? I can move in all kind of circles, but I'm a nigga at heart. I love black people. I feel safest around my people. So for me, I feel like, y'all, we need sleepers, but we need a group of sleepers. We need some folks we need some folks that can wear all black at night and take their yard signs down when they sleeping. The same they do to us, just the other way.
Right,
you know what I'm saying? We ain't gotta make a bunch of noise about it. We ain't gotta go live about it.
We don't have to go over this whole
just like
thing.
when somebody drop money.
Anyways, you get the idea. So, a couple key points that stood out to me in this. She said, this is the only way you're going to change the dynamics in South Carolina. So she's suggesting that basically they're not able to get enough Democrats elected. And because they can't get enough Democrats elected in South Carolina to really change things, she's suggesting they need to have Democrats run as Republicans, get elected as Republicans, and then work secretly for the Democrats. She's saying you got to find some folks that are a little bit polished, maybe are not, nobody's really going to know them that well. Maybe they haven't really been politically active, but we need some secret sleepers. Like we need them to run as the other side, right? Run as the other side, i.e. Republicans, quote, even though they are there for our side, we need them to win. And she adds further in, and then when you get in there, we need enough of us in there, we can wreak havoc for real from the inside out. Pretty significant leak from Project Veritas, because what it's suggesting is not necessarily using voter fraud, but defrauding voters. This is not voter fraud in the normal sense, like voter fraud in terms of rigging an election. This is tricking voters into voting for someone who they believe is going to represent their interests, but is actually not. This is tricking voters into electing someone who's working basically as a spy for the other side, for a political party they don't want to support. This should be considered fraud. Now, will it ever be charged as such? Probably not. Just in terms of laws, unfortunately, they do things like this. In fact, I can point to several members of our House and Senate who may be secretly working for the Democrats on the Republican side, such as the many individuals who passed these red flag gun laws, which I do believe are going to be overturned. I want to do a more complete story on that tomorrow. So you want to hear my take on the red flag laws, stick around tune in tomorrow for that show, because I want to do something a little more complete on it. Also because Clarence Thomas, one point that was missed on his ruling over the New York City concealed carry permit laws is that he actually wrote something additional in there, which I think most people missed. Clarence Thomas made it so that pretty much every gun law in the country could easily be overturned. And not only that, but there's also precedents going back to, I believe, 2015, latest, I think even last year, where the Supreme Court has made some determinations around red flag laws, not just violating the Second Amendment, but also the Fourth Amendment. So if you want to hear about that, tune in tomorrow. But on this a bit more, one thing you have is that, I've investigated, maybe see my documentaries, I've investigated plenty of voter fraud cases. I've also looked into election fraud in New York City. And I know there's a lot of dirty tricks politicians play. People do tend to pay attention more to ballot trafficking, like what Dinesh D'Souza exposed, or issues with the systems themselves. But there's a lot of really, actually called just dirty tricks that are played. One of them, for example, that I found when I was investigating a candidate running in New York long time ago, 2010 or something like that. He actually had one of his best friends run as an opponent because he wanted to split the Korean vote. It was one of the local elections in New York. Basically, there was this corrupt official. He actually got pushed out of office for being corrupt. John Liu. The corrupt official. His main opponent was a Korean American. And it was in a community where you have it was where one of the main Korean communities is. And so in order to win, he had to split the Korean vote. So he had one of his own guys who actually worked in his own office run against that Korean. And so he could again split the Korean vote. And sure enough, he won. That's a dirty trick. It's dishonest. It's just dirty and really deceiving for, I think, voters. But they do stuff like this. Now, this does raise some questions over the integrity of some, what they call rhinos, Republicans in name only. Republicans, people who have run and been elected under the Republican ticket, but are representing and voting for typically Democrat policies. I know some Democrats have pointed to Manchin they say he's basically Republican because he's voted against Democrat issues as well. My personal opinion, of course, officials should be able to vote across party lines. I don't believe that having kind of strict lockstep parties are necessarily a good thing for the country. where different officials vote pretty much in line with just whatever political party they're with. I think they should use their own judgment. The issue, though, is if you have people who are part of a party, who are voting along party lines, but are quietly who are defrauding voters by, again, being with the party, but claiming to be with the other side. I don't think that would, again, be technically illegal, but I do think people should vote them out of office or file some serious complaints about them. I do think it could actually violate some ethics on that as well. But we'll see what happens. More on that in a bit. Folks, on that note, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by Secure. Over 155 million Americans are affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the past year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data or their online activity. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. That can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland, which has the strictest data privacy laws in the world. Secure does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, which also means it's not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act. Secure does not ask for your phone number. It does not mine your data. It also does not upload your contacts. It functions by adding people you know, then adding their secure numbers. And you can still chat with non-secure users by sending them an invite. Now, folks, if you're interested, it's $5 for the messenger or $10 for the email and messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, or you can use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring today's episode. Now, speaking of Republicans who are actually Democrats, or basically voting along Democrat lines, let me show you something else that came up just recently. Liz Cheney, who many of you may know as being on the January 6th committee, and of course, voted to impeach Trump, and many would say is basically a Democrat, although she's a Republican. Liz Cheney is now begging Democrat voters to help her get elected to Congress. Because apparently Republicans don't want to vote for a Republican who's a Democrat, basically. Or who's, you could say, siding with the Democrats in just about every single issue, meaning, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it might be a duck. If it votes like a Democrat, if it moves with the Democrats, it might be a Democrat. And Liz Cheney now is going to Democrat voters to try to get reelected. It says here, Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming, the GOP member who turned on President Trump to become his enemy, possibly because he criticized her father. And there's actually a pretty strong case for that, actually. She does seem to care a lot about her father. And, of course, Trump insulted her father. And then she, of course, went very strongly against Trump after that, right? Now, she's turning to Democrats to try to stay in office. Cheney voted for one of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's failed impeach and remove campaigns against Trump. She took the job as second in command of Pelosi's January 6th investigation commission and got booted from her national GOP leadership post because of that. So now Republicans in Wyoming also rejected her, which is why she's turning to the Democrats, and she's finding herself behind double-digit percentages in most of the polls, probably because people who want to vote for a Republican are going to vote for people who support Republican issues, not Democrat issues. Again, it's just strictly what people want, right? What they actually want to be voting for, and she does not currently represent it because she's basically a Democrat. The Gateway Pundit is reporting that Cheney is mailing campaign brochures to Wyoming Democrats with instructions on, quote, how to switch parties to be able to vote for her in the state's closed August 16th Republican primary. So she's asking Democrats to switch parties so they, again, actually committing it's not legal, but doing something dishonest, asking Democrats to register as Republicans so that they can vote for her in the Republican primary. Again, suggesting that if she does get elected, she's going to represent the Democrat voters. And again, this is a way of basically, putting a Democrat into the Republican primaries. Interesting because, again, the South Carolina state representative was calling for basically the same thing, to have Republicans run under the Democrat tickets because they know they can't get enough Democrats in some areas. Whether it's redistricting, this is a big issue for 2022, whether it's redistricting, whether it's the fact that Democrats have lost a lot of influence, whether it's kind of the resurgence of the Trump movement and so on. A lot of Democrats, they know based on the polls and even according to a lot of their own advisors, that they're probably going to lose both, at least the House, if not both the House and the Senate come 2022, well, this year. And when that happens, of course, they risk losing a lot of things. They risk losing, the speaker, the position of the Speaker of the House. That could very easily go to the Republicans. They could lose, for example, control of the January 6th Commission. And if Republicans get in, they could launch investigations left, right, and center any way they want. They're talking about many things, including going after Hunter Biden and looking at whether Joe Biden is compromised by Hunter Biden's foreign dealings. Something, again, I'll be going over tomorrow more in depth. I want to show you a lot of what's going on with that. They know they can't get elected. And because they know they're going to lose, they're going by hook and by crook, and they're going to Democrat voters and asking Democrat voters to register as Republicans so they can put Democrats, essentially, or people who represent the Democrats, into the, again, mainline political campaigns, so that basically you're either voting for a Democrat or a rhino. The Democrats win either way if they can rig the primaries using that method. Now, again, not an illegal form of fraud, but a form of fraud defrauding voters nonetheless. Now, a bit more on this. I want to go a bit into what's happening with Russia. I mentioned yesterday that I wanted to give a brief update on Russia because we haven't talked about it for a while. I know some of you have been asking about it as well. I want to go over a few key issues with this and kind of show where things are at right now, at least strategically, and what this means politically in terms of geopolitics in the United States and, well, U.S. interests. And frankly, folks, it looks honestly like Russia might win. Putin pulled a very good strategy, good subjectively, right? However you want to look at it, a clever strategy. And basically, this is what happened. In the early days of the war, the Russian FSB, right, their intelligence agency, it seems had some bad calls strategically. They carried out a lot of operations that were based on bad intelligence. Putin purged a lot of those individuals. And after purging a lot of the people in the Russian intelligence agencies, seems to have kind of taken control of things almost himself, or put some new people in who work more closely with him. After doing that, of course, they withdrew their troops from most of the country, redeployed just mainly to the east, and did a more focused war and campaign. Their main focus now has been basically striking Ukrainian troop positions using artillery. And because Ukrainians have mostly gone on the defense, right? They've kind of dug their heels into defensive positions. Those are unfortunately, or whichever side you're on, those are unfortunately very vulnerable positions. You can't play defense like that if your opponent's using artillery. Russia is decimating Ukrainian forces using that method, and it looks like, frankly, again, they are going to win. Now, the United States has deployed, they're providing some, pretty advanced missile systems to try to counter these things. If they can strike the Russian artillery, that's one thing. At the same time, Russia is using a lot of different arms to try to bring other countries into the war, one of the big ones being Belarus, which could become pretty significant because not only is Putin talking about bringing Belarus into the war, he also wants to arm Belarus with nuclear weapons. And he's moving to do it already. It's beyond the talking about it phase. Washington Post has this story. It says here, Belarus preparing to join Russian invasion of Ukraine, U.S. official says. And it says they're planning to send soldiers into Ukraine in support of the Russian invasion in a deployment that could begin as soon as Monday this week. A U.S. administration official said Sunday evening. And another story here from Washington Examiner says this. Those of you curious, by the way, today's tea is a ginseng tea. Now, Washington Examiner says this. Russia to place nuclear-capable missiles in Belarus. Now, typically, these are just ballistic missiles, meaning you can, whatever warhead you want to put on, it's your choice, right? Um, sorry, they're not necessarily nuclear weapons per se, but they're weapons that can be nuclear armed if they so choose to make them nuclear armed. It says Russia plans to place nuclear-capable ballistic missiles in Belarus, a NATO neighboring Russian ally that housed the forces that invaded Ukraine and attacked Kiev. The missile placement would continue a trend of Russian President Vladimir Putin subordinating Belarus to his vision of a union state led by the Kremlin while sending an ominous signal to NATO. Something I've been talking about before, Russia, what they're talking about is, this is the broader picture of the war with Ukraine. In Russia's eyes, this is not about Ukraine per se, even though, of course, in terms of propaganda, in terms of narrative, they're saying, Ukraine. In terms of Russian strategy, I mentioned before, Duginism and so on. And Dugin has less influence over Putin than he used to, right? Alexander Dugin was, again, people called him Putin's Rasputin, right? He was the head of the National Bolshevik Party. He pushes for National Bolshevism. And a lot of Russian military strategy was based on Duginism, including most of their broad campaigns. Duginism, and folks, I bit the bullet. I read his whole book for you all to get an idea of what he's actually talking about, which is called the Fourth Political Theory. Dugin essentially believes that there's going to be kind of a final conflict of world systems, which is now. Interestingly, based on similar ideas like Klaus Schwab and the fourth economic, system, or the fourth turning, if you want to get into like more stages of civilizations. Basically, the same basic idea that people in many other areas of the world are talking about. They believe essentially that the current stage of civilization has reached its final synthesis, and there's going to be some deciding factor, whether it's a war, whether it's a collapse, whether it's the Great Reset or the Build Back Better or whatever else. There's going to be something that's going to trigger pretty much a remaking of the global political system. Dugin talks about this as kind of the final battle between the three main political systems of the past century, which would be fascism, communism, and liberal democracy. Dugin believes the fourth political theory should be a meshing of fascism, or National Socialism in this case, and communism, in this case Bolshevism being Russian communism under Lenin. And so, again, that's what National Bolshevism is. They believe that basically they have to have a final battle between that system and liberal democracy. And that essentially what they view is the toppling of the unipolar government, the one world government currently under the United States, essentially, which is the U.S.-led international order, right? So when they talk, or what you call globalism. So when Putin comes out and talks about overthrowing globalism, that they're fighting the globalists, and I know a lot of people agree with that, this is actually what he's referring to, right? Now, when they're talking about this, that Kremlin sending an ominous signal to NATO, right? Putin's pushing his vision of a union state led by the Kremlin, this is also what they're talking about. They're talking about, of course, Russia controlling the Eurasian region, most of the former Soviet Union, basically, whereas East Asia mostly run by the Chinese Communist Party, maybe, South Asia controlled still by India. Basically, again, creating more of an equitable world order, one where the United States is no longer the sole leader in the international system. Now, that has some pretty serious implications. Some people might agree with it, I understand, right? Because on one side, you're talking about pretty much overthrowing the whole Soros agenda and, that side of things, that side of the whole one world government, globalism, etc., which is why Soros is going to the World Economic Forum and saying that Russia needs to be stopped because they're pretty much destroying the whole vision they have of this, one world order, essentially. The system Russia's talking about is more equitable, right? Equity is an equality of outcome, where different stakeholders in the international system kind of have an equal weight in terms of countries. So you will still have countries, essentially, even though each country might be practicing its own brand, frankly, of socialism. Now, on this note, Russia is making some serious moves towards that. And frankly, it looks like they might actually accomplish it, the way things are heading right now. Not to mention the economic downturn in the United States. Frankly, I think the irony with a lot of this is I do think that this is my personal analysis, right? Take it for what it's worth. I do personally think the Democrats maybe are intentionally trying to destroy the U.S. economy. If they're not intentionally doing it, then it's either intentional or just absolute incompetence. Let's put it that way. They're either doing things so badly that they're doing every wrong thing you could possibly do, or they're doing it intentionally. And frankly, I don't know which one it is. Regardless, though, of course, we're watching the oil market just collapse. And they say there's no end in sight to it. We're watching inflation rise. We're watching recession. So we're in both a recession we're facing both recession and inflation simultaneously. We're watching the brewing food crisis. As these things kind of percolate globally, we're also going to watch an immigration crisis, especially as this begins to impact more Latin America and Africa, which in Russia's eyes and in Belarus's eyes, because they've done this previously, immigration, basically forced immigration, right? Destabilizing countries so you have mass immigration is seen as a weapon. Flooding a country, for example, with people who need housing or welfare benefits or some kind of social benefits then drains the resources of that country because they have to serve a new people who typically need some time to be able to take care of themselves or just are never able to take care of themselves. It tends to put an economic drain on countries unless it's regulated immigration and they are kind of guaranteed a position at a company or something like that, which is how legal immigration would normally work, right? Now, as this is moving forward, we're seeing as well that Russia is also targeting Poland and Lithuania. Lithuania is already kind of leaning towards Russia as well. Poland is holding its ground, opposing Russia for the most part. Now, their borders separate Belarus from Kaliningrad, which is interesting as well because Belarus then plays a much more significant role in this, right? Now, this is the quote from Putin on this. He said, "Our decision has been made. We will hand over a number of tactical missile systems, Iskander-M, to Belarus within the next few months." Now, the United States, under some circumstances, might try to intervene on the transfer of ballistic weapons. Remember, that was why, under Bush, they claimed that we invaded Iraq, right? The weapons of mass destruction. Anyone remember the weapons of mass destruction? At the same time, Iran is making some pretty serious strides towards becoming a nuclear-powered nation. Israel is calling for people to leave. You have a lot of stuff like this happening. One sec. Oh, folks, yeah, sorry, I forgot. We had to jump over to Epic TV. Let me continue all this on Epic TV. I want to go into what China's doing, and then I also want to bring in some experts to join us for the Q&A and for a nice discussion, talking about the culture of death that Roe v. Wade represented and how this impacted the United States. It's going to be an interesting discussion. Come join us on Epic TV, a lot to talk about. Folks, also, again, if you don't have an account with Epic TV yet, we're giving you a free 14-day trial. Go into the description, get your free 14-day trial, and come join the discussion because we still have over an hour of the show we're still doing today. Before we jump over, though, let me show you something interesting. This is the former Assistant Secretary of State, David Stilwell, talking about the China diplomacy trap and what this means.
But when we say war, we need to get out of this mindset of people wearing uniforms and killing other people and blood being shed and think more in terms of, well, biological warfare, economic warfare with COVID, information warfare with what's going on inside our own media.
Today I sit down with retired Brigadier General David Stilwell. From 2011 to 2013, he served as the defense attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing and was appointed Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs in 2019.
In the past, America was so big and strong that we could be basically a Nebraska alignment. It's not that way anymore. So we have to think more in terms of judo. Use your adversary's strength against them.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.
All right, folks. Again, if you don't have an Epic TV account, go into the description, grab the account. We're giving you a free trial. Join us over there. There's a great discussion in the chat. I always enjoy it. I'll see you there. All right, folks. Yeah, Real Mango, you said question. Hello, John.